We're back with America's Forum, and Francesca Page, Newsmax TV contributor, is back with us. Francesca?
Thanks, JD. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie stumbles again. For the second time in 2 months, the governor missteps while trying to court Jewish donors. The first instance came in March while Christie was in Las Vegas, gathering of the Republican Jewish coalition. He was discussing a recent trip to Jerusalem, and he said, "I took a helicopter ride from occupied territories across and just felt personally how extraordinary that it was to understand the military risk that Israel faces every day."
Now, that comment drew sharp criticism about the occupied territories. The Israeli government and most of Israel's supporters in the U.S. don't consider the West Bank and East Jerusalem to be occupied territory. By saying the area is, quote, occupied, well, it implies that Israeli troops should not be in the area. And after the speech, the governor explained that he simply misspoke. Now, the second stumble happened yesterday when Governor Christie spoke at the Champions of Jewish Values International Awards Gala in New York. His keynote addressed several issues concerning foreign policy. In part, he said, and I quote, "We need to stand once again loudly for these values, and sometimes that's going to mean standing in some very messy, difficult places, standing long and hard for those things we believe in. We will either lead or disappoint. Those are the only two choices. Unfortunately, today, in my opinion, America is disappointing, but it is not too late." Here's the problem. Despite engaging on this subject, Governor Christie failed to mention Israel by name. In fact, throughout his entire address, the governor never mentioned Israel, and that omission is raising some questions as to why he failed to do so. Joining us now to offer some insight, one of America's most prominent legal minds and author of the book, Taking the Stand, My Life in the Law, Professor Alan Dershowitz. Alan, we welcome you back to America's Forum. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much. You know, when you called and asked me to be on this show, I bet you didn't know that I was there last night and was actually sitting about 10 feet away from where Governor Christie made his speech.
Well, this is perfect. So you're an eyewitness, and I get to play the part of the attorney. So
Right.
Tell me, counselor, what was your perception of, did it occur to you on first impression that there was a glaring omission not mentioning Israel by name?
Well, I had a slightly different approach to it. I thought it was a stump speech, that it was somewhat inappropriate for a charitable event which had Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody talking about people who do a great deal of good to the world. Sean Penn was there. He had saved a rabbi who was improperly imprisoned in Bolivia. And the governor got up and made essentially a stump speech, as compared to Governor Perry of Texas, who got up and made an extremely appropriate speech in which he did mention Israel. He talked about Jewish values. It's almost as if Governor Christie went into his vest pocket and picked out, I think I'll make speech number 7, stump speech. It was very critical of Obama, very critical of the current administration, and it didn't seem particularly appropriate. Now, I was on Governor Christie's side on the occupation issue. I think it is fair to describe what Israel's presence, military presence in the West Bank as an occupation. By the way, occupations are completely legal. The United States occupied Germany and Japan after the Second World War. It's perfectly okay to maintain a military occupation until peace is made, and the Palestinians have refused to make peace. So I don't think the Israelis ought to be apologetic about continuing a military occupation of the West Bank. So I actually thought he got a bum rap on the occupation issue, but a fair criticism yesterday on a stump speech that seemed more appropriate to a political campaign than to a Jewish charitable event.
Christy, do you think the term occupied triggers certain obligations for Israelis under international law?
Well, it does, and Israel has said openly and over and over again that they comply with the Geneva Conventions as far as the occupation is concerned. As I said before, I believe that Israel is entitled to have a military occupation. That is, it's entitled to have its troops in the Jordan Valley and to protect itself from possible attacks from Iran or anywhere else. and from terrorists. Obviously, there are still terrorist attacks coming from the West Bank. The issue of civilian settlements is a very, very different issue, and of course, the governor didn't speak about those at all. That's really controversial. But the area of a military occupation should not be controversial under international law. 242 of the Security Council basically says that the occupation can continue until peace is achieved, until all the Arab neighbors are willing to recognize Israel's right to exist with safe and secure boundaries. That hasn't yet happened. Until that happens, Israel is fully permitted under international law to maintain a military occupation.
So, Alan, your problem with Governor Christie last night was it was more of a stump speech, and we can theorize about that. Governor Christie talking about, gee, it'd be tough to campaign against Jeb Bush, but we both enjoy it, and saying, I at least have 9 months left in this job, so maybe he's gearing up to run. But whether he runs for president or not, do you think it would do Governor Christie a world of good to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu? He met with him a couple of years ago. Would it be wise, regardless of his future plans, for Governor Christie to sit down with the Israeli Prime Minister once again?
Absolutely. Look, everybody benefits from sitting down with Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu has been my friend since 1973. We don't agree about everything, but I wouldn't dream of taking a trip to Israel without sitting down with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Every time I do, I learn something from him. Every time I do, I get new information. Governor Christie, if he's going to be a national figure, should be sitting down with America's most important ally in the Middle East, learning the most current views on the Iran crisis, on the Syrian crisis, on every other issue. Governor Christie did talk quite a bit, and I thought well about Syria, and he talked about red lines, and he talked about how the United States, by not abiding by the red line involving Syria's chemical weapons, may have emboldened Putin and may have weakened the perception of America as a country that maintains its red lines. He did do that, and he did a good job. The speech in general was well received. I think a number of people noticed the omission of Israel, but by inference, he talked about the Middle East, he talked about American allies. Again, so my criticism was more of the stump nature of the speech than about what he admitted or included.
Alan Dershowitz, we'll have to leave that topic right there. Thanks for giving us your eyewitness account through this interview. We notice not testimony on the stand, but we don't question its veracity. We're coming right back.